Told through the stories of today's leaders in finance, tech, real estate, culture, and sustainability. We share the boundless and beautiful technology of nature, where health is the new luxury and opportunities for a better future are being crafted by the second. This is Planet Gold, with your host, Enzo Di Taranto.
Welcome to this new edition of Planet Gold, my eco-podcast to re-engineer the global climate agenda at the horizon 2030. In this episode, I speak with Mamadou Toure, the founder of Africa 2.0 and of the Ubuntu Tribe, a community of investors and entrepreneurs engaged in fostering sustainable growth in Africa and worldwide through innovative investment schemes. Mamadou was also a speaker at my latest Eco Mastermind during COP28 in Dubai, and the producer of, as I said, disruptive investment activations during the last World Economic Forum in Davos, with the aim of enhancing the triple bottom line: people, profit, and planet. In this episode, I also converse with Mamadou about issues of a deeper nature concerning the intersection between sustainability, technology, and spirituality. I always enjoy conversing with Mamadou these subtle issues. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure that you will too. Welcome to this new episode of Planet Gold, my new eco podcast to re-engineer the global climate agenda at the horizon 2030. Today, we are with a very good friend and an inspirational leader, Mr. Mamadou, live from Dubai, where actually we co-produced an Eco Mastermind during COP28 in December 2023, which was renowned by the audience as the true COP28, because we really approached a number of issues at the intersection between sustainability, spirituality, and technology. And Mr. Mamadou added enormous value to that conversation. We will post also that panel shortly. But today, I would like to honor the presence of Mamadou on the Planet Gold platform, and maybe give you the floor to introduce yourself, your recent experience at both COP28 and World Economic Forum in Davos, your assessment, but first of all, your life story, Mamadou. We know that you come from the mystical continent of Africa. You have the depth of the African soul. So what is your life story and how you ended up to conceive and create the Ubuntu Tribe?
First of all, thank you so much, Enzo, for having me. You know, your passion is contagious. I know this topic is very dear to your heart, and I have fond memories of this panel that we had in Dubai during COP28. So excited to continue the conversation and to answer your question about my life story. Yes, indeed, I'm an African and I'm a proud African. But as you know, there's this famous quote that says, I am not African, not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. Right. So I was born under, I had the privilege to be born on the motherland. You know, did my childhood there. and then followed my parents. My dad was an immigrant, and my mom and I followed, and I grew up the rest of my adolescence in Paris, in France, where I had the chance to study, and studied finance, and started working with a large international firm, KPMG, and then investment banking with BNP Paribas out of Paris, mostly mergers and acquisition, government advisory, project finance, to then join the World Bank, where I was positioned in Africa, actually in Johannesburg, spending actually also a big chunk of my time also in Washington, in charge of investment in telecom, media, technology. To then thereafter, after 8 years at IFC World Bank, was approached by GE to be managing director in charge of investment and project finance for Sub-Saharan Africa, covering all the subsidiaries of the group in Sub-Saharan Africa: power, water, mining, oil and gas, aviation, transportation, healthcare. So it really gave me a huge breadth in terms of all the key strategic pillars of an economy, and with a big giant at the time like GE, it was quite a great experience. But in parallel to this corporate world of mine, after GE, by the way, before I even go there, that's where I decided to venture and start Ubuntu Tribe, right? I mean, the Ubuntu Group in particular, and starting with Ubuntu Capital in the first place, right? And how did Ubuntu Capital started? It came from this parallel life that I was having as a corporate investment banker across my career. I actually was also a social entrepreneur from very young age, right? So I started my first NGO, I was 19, right? So in high school, entering university. And the whole idea for me, I was considered myself as privileged, coming from, modest African background, and having the chance to be, accepted in Ivy League, European schools, etc. I felt the urgency to give back, in the sense that, yes, I was privileged, but it also came for me with a responsibility to make sure that that privilege could be shared by others who may never have the chance to be where I was, but at least give back. So, more than a decade later, still during my corporate years, while I was at IFC, I felt Africa needed a vision, and a vision carried by its next generation of leaders who were all positioned in key jobs across the corporate, at the very top of the corporate ladder, but also in top positions in government in Africa and around the world. And it was a generation that was thirsty of change, right? And that had its own perspective as to where Africa should go, in a context where everybody had an agenda for Africa, right? But what was Africa's agenda for itself? So in parallel to my day job, I started Africa 2.0 Foundation, which really was bringing together young leaders from Africa and the diaspora from around the world to come together and co-create, and at least design together, and co-create the Africa we want, and articulate that in a manifesto with a proposed vision for the African continent by the young global leaders of this continent from Africa and the diaspora. And it turned out to be quite successful. We worked for 2 years from 60 different locations around the world, and collaborated to put together this manifesto that we presented at the World Economic Forum, actually, at the time, more than a decade ago. And then at the African Union, and the name was Africa 2.0 because we were really looking at building the next version of Africa, right? A prosperous, enlightened, and sustainable Africa. That's really the perspective we had So I was living this double life, if you may, right? Hardcore investment banker, but with a social impact, of course, since I was with IFC World Bank, but also social entrepreneur, community leader, galvanizing not just my generation, but also pushing advocacy, because Africa 2.0 was like what you would call a think tank, right? A think tank that does things. So as we did that, we started engaging and pushing advocacy. And 3 years later, you know, the African Union heads of states, I think 47 heads of state ratified Agenda 2063, which proposed a 5 decades long-term vision for Africa. So for us, it was quite a victory. And, you know, as I was managing director for GE, driving this international foundation organization and community, I felt the need of addressing somehow this schizophrenia, you know, in terms of, you know, how do you do business, right? But also bring consciousness and impact into the way you drive business. And that's how Ubuntu was born, because I was, of course, at the time very familiar with ancient African philosophies and values. And the name Ubuntu means I am because we are, right? It kind of refers to the sense that you don't exist in isolation. Everything is interconnected. And that's really what I thought business and hardcore capitalism somehow had forgotten, that everything was interconnected. And how do we bring back, you know, the humanity in everything, right? And the consciousness that we are all part of one, and that Ubuntu philosophy was really the blueprint of this whole Ubuntu Group and venture. It started with advisory, you know, where we had Ubuntu Capital, and we advised, you know, leading organizations like European Investment Bank, European Union, African Development Bank, large funds into proposing new models of investment that combine financial and social return. And as we went through this journey, I realized that yes, you know, I felt like it was relevant, but I felt like it was not enough, right? And of course, the main challenge in those cases is, what is it that we really need to transform or shift to create that long-standing, sustainable, impactful change? And it came for me with understanding the gap that there is between African GDP per se, using modern Western metrics, and Africa's wealth, right? In a context where, you know, you have a GDP at continent level that is at 2.1 trillion, but yet you have natural resources estimated at $100 trillion, right? So if we could reverse, right, the way this wealth is valued and monetized, then we could create a model of shared prosperity on one side. But by restoring the definition of wealth to natural capital, you also help people shift their mindset in understanding the wealth of what they truly have, whether it would be the Congo Basin, the underground resources and everything. So for me, it was a way to effectively, while you push financial inclusion and shared prosperity, you restore a consciousness of the true wealth that we came to this world with, which is what Mother Earth actually gives, right? And in that way, you shift from one of the fundamental principles of capitalism that was based on an economy of scarcity to another fundamental principle, universal principle that the planet offers, which is an economy based on abundance, right? The planet was here before us, and as a result, has always been providing, no matter what, right? So how do we now use economics, technology, finance, by reorganizing the nature and the definition of wealth, so that you see wealth in the air you breathe, in the assets underground, in the water you drink, by involving tokenization and real world asset tokenization. That's really where Ubuntu Tribe, as fintech company and financial platform, has really ventured into and leveraging on the basic needs to actually shift the basic understanding of the world we live in.
Yeah. On this note, if I may, Mamadou, first of all, thank you very much for this inspirational introduction. I felt that your heart and your mind were navigating among different dimensions, right? From finances to corporate to nature-based instincts. Yeah. But I want to share an anecdote that I think contributes to this conversation, because myself, as a young diplomat in the early 90s, I was deployed in South Africa during the transition from the apartheid-based regime to the first ever presidential elections that fortunately put Nelson Mandela, in power. And I learned first about Ubuntu as a philosophy of, as an existential philosophy, right? So, I mean, why individuals exist on this planet and why I am because we are. And so this is something I would like to have your perspective on, because you touched the point, but I think if we go a little bit deeper, it will be of much value to our audiences. So when we say I am because we are, this is a human-centric philosophy. It refers to human beings, right? But what I feel actually is that if we go one step farther and we equate humans and animals and vegetables and fishes and stars, I mean, everything that is in existence on this planet, right? And so we go one step further, is that we as individuals exist because the ants and the bees also exist, you see? And that is, I think the paradigm shift that we need to instill in people in order to, avoid that somebody throws a plastic straw on a beach and doesn't feel that it's killing, humanity as a whole. How do you feel about this?
Look, I mean, you have a very, very solid point here, and it's good you bring it up, because that was the next point of the understanding Ubuntu, right? And it's funny indeed. I've had the privilege to know and meet Nelson Mandela and his family, and Graça Machel, and also his grandchildren, and they were the first people who actually introduced me to this concept. Right. So I was privileged when we started Africa 2.0 to have somebody like him and Graça Machel to back us under that very principle of Ubuntu. And if you go actually to the etymology of the word Ubuntu, it's quite interesting, right? So it's not just a word you find in South Africa. You find it in Rwanda, they say Ubuntu. Umubuntu, you find it also in Lingala, they say Abatu. In Rwanda, it means men and women. In Lingala, which is DRC, and it means the people. But if you go further in understanding what Ubuntu means, it comes from the combination of two words, which is Aba Netu, right? And Aba Netu, when you think of it, Aba means from, right? Derived from. And Netu is actually the word that you would recognize in ancient Kemetic language, which is the very, very early days of the Egyptian civilization. And Netu refers to Neterus. The Neterus, Neter, are in ancient, very ancient Egyptian civilization, refers to the gods. They would call the Neterus called the gods, and as you would know, there would be a god of the sun, Ra, a god of the moon, Amun, etc. So every god represented a very element of nature,
Of nature.
right? And Neteru is the very word that gives natura,
Right.
nature, natura. So
So,
when we say Ubuntu, Abantu, it means from nature, from the gods. We are the divine creation of the gods of nature, of Mother Nature. So there's a very powerful cosmological meaning in Ubuntu, right? And it reminds us it's beyond the global declaration of interdependence, is the understanding that when I am because we are is not just we as humans, is we as
exactly.
everything that exists have that
Exactly.
interconnection, right? It's some form of quantum entanglement to the whole, right? And when you say, even when you talk about karma, what I do to you, I do to me, etc. So this very, very powerful word, that's why we chose it, and that's why we want to bring it back to the modern civilization for us to never forget, right?
Yes.
That we are part of a whole and everything is interconnected from the
Yes.
micro particle to the macrocosm, right? As
Everything.
within, so without, as above, so below, and so on, and all those hermetic laws of interconnection, and that are universal laws, right?
Yeah.
So by bringing that back in the way we do things, then it de facto changes the way we interact with one another and the way we interact with nature and everything that is. Because if it's a reflection of me and it's part of me, I'm actually doing that to myself, right?
Yes. Yes.
Therefore, which is then the point where India speaks about karma, right? Where ultimately you'll pay for what you've done, right?
Yes.
Why? Because you're actually doing it to yourself, right? So, and that's why bringing technology into the whole understanding of Ubuntu, right? And even when you think of blockchain technology, right? What is blockchain? Ultimately, blockchain is the capacity or the principle of recording information in a decentralized manner across different servers and computers in a simultaneous way. But what is that? The equivalent is the Akashic record.
Yes. It's
Right?
a web.
It's the cloud, right?
It's
So,
exactly.
and it for me, and that's why I've always said, blockchain is just a mathematical interpretation of a spiritual principle.
Totally.
Right? And as such, for us to go and look at those technologies that are the inspiration of nature in the end, right?
Yes.
Of how the universe works, and restoring them for the human psyche and human usage, for realignment, ultimately, for us to remember where we're coming from, right?
Yes.
And the very essence of our message, when is to effectively build, model, tokenize assets, create the share ownership, utilize the technologies that validate them and that restore them for what they truly are and what they truly bring, and how they are also a way for us to elevate, right?
Yes.
It's not just about economic empowerment here. It's about transition from empowerment to enlightenment, right?
Yes.
And we use technology for that. And the same way as, I think it's Gandhi who said, "My life is my message," right? The point is, if you can create a company, and that has been my quest since I started this Ubuntu journey, and I was lucky and privileged, like I mentioned before, to be sitting on the shoulders of giants who believed in me and who have helped on this journey, is if we can design a model that reflects those intrinsic human and universal principle, right? Then ensure that it works and that it actually creates a virtuous circle of of regenerative prosperity through regenerative finance, through regenerative mining, through regenerative agriculture, the same way as nature is effectively structured, then you kind of serve that purpose, or our company is our message, our community is our message. And if it can inspire others by showing that it effectively works, then we have contributed in service to humanity and to the planet we live in.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And Benedict Hadley, our producer for the Planet Gold platform, he knows this very well, because I have been articulating this concept since now a few years. So what I say is that nature is the chief technology. In fact, when you look at nature, and this is something I try to stay connected with that energy, because that leads exactly to the considerations you just made, and you so eloquently described it as the mathematical transformation of nature-based principles, right? And
Yes.
if you see the internet that's why it's called the web. I mean, if you see a spider's web,
Like a spider web, yeah, right.
Exactly the same algorithm of any internet application. So we are not inventing nothing new or extraordinary. We are just replicating different layers of dynamics that are in existence in nature, and that humanity has simply lost the clarity and capacity
and
to interpret, right? And this is because there have been religions, there have been cultural and societal cages that have entrapped our minds and our consciousness. And that's why we are destroying the planet, because we just have lost touch with those inspirational principles that we can see everywhere around us. So how we can re-engineer the global climate agenda, for me, as you, and I'm basically building on a point that you just mentioned, and I want to drive this conversation on more practical, issues. But, we agree that we need, and, we have a role to play in raising awareness and expanding consciousness of individuals in order to better observe and apply nature-based principles in business and in life, okay? And there is the whole conversation about longevity that, at one stage we can also, develop. But if we stick to finance and technology, right? How do you suggest that we enhance our impact on circles of power like the United Nations, the COP28, the World Economic Forum, the royalties, the banking and finance sector? So how we can contribute without being critical or in opposition, but rather, constructively contributing to those who have the power and the resources to move the climate agenda to the next level. How would you suggest to us to do it without disrupting too much? Because that would be counterproductive to us.
Look, I think, at first it's important to also salute the fact that we've gone a long way, right? Just in the narrative, compared to, a couple of decades ago, there's been a real rise in understanding the urgency to act, right? Now, the one thing I would say about the leadership and the narrative, unfortunately for me, it's been driven a bit too much by fear, right? And yes, people maybe act more in terms of emergency through fear, but I just believe that if there is a stronger message and an approach that is love-based, that is around a collective understanding and a collective reconnection to nature and to the power that it is, that would help significantly, right? Um, and when it comes to the leaders driving this narrative, to be honest with you, it's how do you make it palatable for the man on the street, right? Because ultimately, it will only change if my grandma in the village also understands the power of this, right? How do you make carbon credit a notion that is effectively that anyone can connect with, right? In a context where it still remains so technical and also very centralized in many ways that it fails in some ways to catch fire, if I can use that expression, because it remains somehow a bit too exclusive, right? While people learn through examples, right? I think there's so much to learn from indigenous people and put them more in the forefront because they have the keys, right? Nature-based science is there's been many times in the past within our civilization where a lot of solutions are actually within us or deep hidden some places, right? And if you look, for instance, how much the pharmaceutical industry has gone to take from those indigenous, from those sacred plants, from all that, right? And transform it for sure, but without necessarily giving the credit, right? If we only gave credit, starting by those who are actually the artisan of preserving nature and who have the codes and the keys by having our being the less polluters ultimately, right? And we tell them not to pollute while they already don't pollute. Then you have a mismatch in narrative and a mismatch in alignment. I think that is important, and also the point of reconnecting and you can only get there if you get people to really love the planet they live in. And there's not enough point, in my view, in inviting that part of our emotional connection to the planet, right? And I'm going to use spirituality again. The point of the frequency of the heart is 100 to 1,000 times bigger and wider than the frequency of the brain. But if you only talk to people at the brain level, then your impact is 100 times less than it could be. And I'm also going to use another key point, which is, like Maya Angelou used to say, people will forget what you told them about reaching a certain number of degrees. People will forget what you did to them, maybe some oil spillage here and there, but they would never forget how you made them feel, right? And I think as we don't spend enough time inviting people to reconnect with nature to understand how important it is to protect it. I have personally have to deprogram myself from the traditional modern human, urban, to actually learn to appreciate those things, right? And by spending more time, and you were talking about mathematics and so on. Look, nature is pure math, right? You find the Fibonacci sequence in everything, right? And just by telling that to people and getting them to understand, there's little is done in in reconnecting people to nature, and in understanding indeed that everything is interconnected, but also listen to the wise, the elders, the people that I went to the village, for instance, and start telling to my elders about blockchain. They laughed at me, right? They said, "Oh, so you think you've invented something great?" I said, "I think this is going to change the world." They said, "Yeah, maybe it was going to bring us to the world the way it was." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Look, before colonization, when a child would be born and when the land would be, you would bring 4 or 5 elders to validate that this is my child, or this is my land, or this is this, so that if 1 or 2 would no longer be there, you still have 3, which is the fundamental principle of blockchain, right?" And then I realized that there's so much that we've lost along the way. A basic example, we can't rebuild the pyramids today. So there's something that we've lost and that we need to go back and recollect, right? So I think, and I did like, on the panel when I was with you, the initiative of, that they're doing in India with,
the pop movement.
Yeah, the pop movement, where the youth are actually embracing it, right? About 1 billion people getting into climate, right? So those are the things that need to happen so that the connection happens and everybody feels not just the duty. The problem is that it's being presented to everyone as it's your duty, you have to do it, it's your top down, etc. There's only so much discipline or alignment that you can get through vertical orders. But if you get people to connect with their heart about how important it is and what wealth we have, then they'll understand that they shouldn't destroy that wealth. But it's not presented as wealth so far, right? The same way as Africa is seen poor because it doesn't have paper dollar. But our wealth is immense if we start valuing our natural capital. So the system itself does not encourage anyone to value, and that's why we decided to tokenize real life assets, to get people back to understand that the wealth might be elsewhere. And when you can have on your phone a piece of the Congo Basin that has value, a piece of water that is tokenized, or the tokenized gold, or the underground resources that you get paid to keep underground, but you use satellite to estimate its value, and then you monetize and you tokenize it, and you trade it. Suddenly you're going to start preserving.
That's certainly one of the verticals of work that we need to keep developing, moving forward. And as you rightly mentioned, with the POP movement, and POP stands for Protect Our Planet. So, thanks to the leadership of the Pachauri family, there has been this amazing support from the elites, from as you say, the giants of this world, from Arnold Schwarzenegger to, former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, and, many others. But the point is that we engage the elites in order to impact the masses, you see? And so this
it needs to be bottom up and not top down only.
Exactly. I mean, now there is a dichotomy because the elites are not dialoguing with the youth and with the consumers, because there are so much financial layers in between that don't allow that. But through technology, we can accelerate, we can close that gap very rapidly.
Certainly.
And that is one of the solutions that we need to keep building upon. But Mamadou, just moving towards the end of our technology. Very interesting and in my view, inspirational conversation. This platform is called Planet Gold because for me, sustainability is the new gold. It's the new wealth, because that allows us to become healthier and become richer, in this new concept of wealth that you also suggested earlier. And so in this perspective, there is one question that I pose to all my guests in conclusion of these interesting conversations. which is if you would have a magic wand, right? If you would have no financial limitations, no limitation in access to human talent or any material resource, and you could just do one thing that, in your view, could dramatically move the climate agenda to the next level, what would you do?
Look, I would do exactly what I'm doing now, but I will accelerate it, and I would hopefully have millions of people doing it with me, which is we need to create a shift in value and values, right? We'll only preserve what we value. So up to now, the only thing that is valued is money or power, right? So how do you give value and values in natural capital, the water, the forest? So that's why we tokenize natural capital and democratize access to it for everybody to start seeing what is its true value and start learning how to preserve it, because suddenly we've aligned their value with their values, and everybody now has, because the planet belongs to us, but we belong to the planet at the end of the day, right? And my actual dream is to say, how can I work with leaders and the people everywhere to effectively accelerate this mindset from an economy of scarcity that is extractive to an economy of abundance that is regenerative, right?
Wonderful.
And technology is, for me, that magic wand, right?
Yes.
Is that tool that suddenly I can give a piece of gold or a piece of lithium that is not extracted, or some water reserve access, or a piece of a forest that produces clean air, or a piece of carbon credit to anyone with a mobile phone. Suddenly they're going to start realizing that, wow, this is precious, because I've created now the connection between what they were told had value with what truly has value, right? And therefore the values start changing, because money is new as a tool.
Right.
Nature has always been there, and the ancient didn't have money. So they would, of course, value nature versus extracting and destroying nature to create money. That's and that's, for me, yeah, the magic wand will be that mindset shift. But
interesting.
Until we have a magic wand, I decided to use technology.
Which is a magic wand by itself. If you use it correctly, and strategically. But listen, Mamadou, we are running out of time in terms of regenerating the planet, as you say, because obviously the demographic growth is exponential, and so we have to accelerate these dynamics. So I invite you to keep working together, join forces. We will do all we can to support your mission, your platform, your talent, your leadership. And we have to get ready for COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, which is a very interesting location to have a COP, I feel. And so be ready to disrupt the agenda there with these constructive inputs. I mean, we don't want to break the system necessarily, or dramatically or rapidly, but certainly contribute with regenerative, to use a terminology that you like using properly, so that we present ourselves as part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so thank you very much again, Mamadou, for your inspirational contribution. We wish you all the best in your mission, in your endeavor. Count
Thank
on
you for
us
having me.
for anything that we can do. And yeah, God bless and always love the planet.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Look, you can count on me 200%. And like they say, Ubuntu, I am because we are. Together we rise.
Ubuntu. Thank you, brother. Merci beaucoup.
Thank
À
you.
bientôt.
Merci.
Au revoir.
À bientôt. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Planet Gold, the stories of today's leaders in finance, tech, real estate, culture, and sustainability, where health is the new luxury and opportunities for a better future are being crafted by the second. Hosted by Enzo Di Taranto, engineered by Benedict Hadley. Planet Gold, a Circle X Hadley Broadcasting production.